My name is Lance Williams. My Unessay is called Traditional Japanese Culture's Effect on Yasunari Kawabata's Literature, Despite the Meiji Restoration. So, who was Yasunari Kawabata? Kawabata was a Japanese author born in 1899, and he held a very strong interest in traditional Japanese culture. This can be seen through his literature, and he also even joined a traditional Japanese spiritual group briefly. And he was also born a few decades after the Meiji Restoration. So his story that I read was The Grasshopper and the Bell Cricket. Before I elaborate on this story, I'd like to establish what singing insect is. So singing insects are insects that project sound, like crickets, grasshoppers, and cicadas. If you've ever been outside at night, definitely heard a cricket before. So those are what singing insects are, just insects that project sound. And so back to the grasshopper and the bell cricket. It's a short story by Kawabata, and in this story, it's this narrator who's on this college campus, and he ventures to the outskirts of this campus to this forest, and he sees all these Japanese children. They're all holding these lanterns, looking for singing insects, and so eventually, one boy finds an insect that he thinks is a grasshopper. So he calls all the children over. They're all excited and they're all discussing this insect. So the boy says, "Hey, this is a grasshopper." And so this girl says, "No, that's a bell cricket." And so this practice of hunting for singing insects was actually done in traditional Japan. And so that shows that Kawabata was interested in these traditional Japanese practices. And so also singing insects along with lanterns, they have some significance in traditional Japanese culture. So these practices of, or this practice of hunting for singing insects, it was done in Japan's Edo period. This was a period from 1603 to 1867, in which Japan was controlled by this Tokugawa shogunate military government. This government held a strict policy of isolationism. They rejected Western culture, Western ideas, and because Japan's an island, that allowed them to remain isolated. And through this isolationism, they became very rich in Japanese culture, untainted from foreign ideas. And they were also an agrarian and feudal society. So a lot of peasants controlled under nobles, under the samurai, and there were a lot of farming, a lot of farmers. So the singing insect hunts done during the Edo period were done in Kyoto court. So Kyoto court, or Japanese court, it's basically another word for capital. And so the capital was in Kyoto. And so the royals here, they would go out on these singing insect hunts. They would travel to the outskirts of Kyoto, in which they'd go on these picnics. They'd listen to the singing insects, and then they would capture them. And then they would bring them back to the imperial court, shown in this picture. It's still there, which is pretty cool. And they would discuss these singing insects and identify them and say, "Hey, this one sounds the coolest, has the best sound." And yeah, so you can see the parallels between that practice done in Kyoto and the story shown in the grasshopper and the bell cricket. The children going out into the woods, you can easily see how that's alluding to the royal court going out to the outskirts of Kyoto to hunt for the singing insects. And then in the story, once the children find the insect, they all come together to talk about it. Now that can easily be compared to the royal court bringing the insects back to Kyoto to discuss the insects and say, "Hey, this one sounds the coolest. This one has the best calls. This one is a bell cricket or whatever." Now, it's pretty significant that Kawabata had this interest in traditional Japanese culture and practices because he was born just a few decades after the Meiji Restoration. Now, the Meiji Restoration marked the end of the Edo period, and it was this period in which Japan really changed their whole lifestyle and society. And so it began when this U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Tokyo Bay. He came on this fleet of naval or modern naval ships that the U.S. had. And Japan, being isolated for 200 years, they weren't industrialized, and they saw all this modern technology and said, "Hey, if we don't modernize, we're gonna be very vulnerable to be captured by someone like this." And so they eventually overthrew the Tokugawa shogunate, and the Emperor Meiji was restored to power, which is why it's called the Meiji Restoration. Sorry. Okay. So yeah. So changes in Japan because of the Meiji Restoration. Um, once again, I said their whole society was changed. It really was. So Japan ended their policy of isolationism, and they actually kind of went the opposite direction. They kind of, I don't know what the opposite of isolationism would be, but they changed their whole society and they modeled it after Western countries such as the U.S. and Great Britain, and they changed their society from that agrarian society to an industrialized society. So less farming, a lot more factories. And Japan's court was also changed from Kyoto, where the insect hunts were done, to Tokyo. And through this, traditional Japan ended and modern Japan begun. Okay. And so Japan really modeled themselves after Western nations, like I said, and this can be seen just through these two images. In the middle is Emperor Meiji himself, and on the right is Commodore Matthew Perry. You can see the similarities in the outfits. That's just one of many things that Japan modeled themselves after. So in conclusion, Kawabata was born only a few decades after the Meiji Restoration, this huge shift from traditional Japan to modern Japan. But despite this, he still held this very strong interest in traditional Japanese culture, and just the insect hunt done in the grasshopper and the bell cricket is just one example of this, of his deep interest in traditional Japanese culture. So yeah, that's my Unessay project. Thank you. Have a good day.